Hi everybody, I'm Jen Phillips. A fan of South Plains politics? Here's your talking points for this week. As lawmakers settle into work, the southern U.S. border comes to the forefront yet again. Governor Abbott vowing to secure the border at his inauguration, and a delegation of Republican U.S. congressmen promising the same. So what can really be done, and what's the likelihood of anything happening? And the Texas state budget proposals submitted this week. They leave a lot of money up for grabs. More than $50 billion, in fact. If you ask 3 different lawmakers, they'll have 3 different ideas about how to spend it. So where does it go if we don't?
From the studios of KAMC Television in Lubbock, your local election headquarters. This is Talking Points.
Thanks for joining us. The U.S. hit its borrowing cap Thursday, and while we aren't expected to default on our debt before June, it's a warning that a solution needs to come quickly. The debt ceiling is the maximum amount the federal government is able to borrow. It currently stands at $34.1 trillion. Congress uses it as a way for them to restrict the growth of borrowing, and it's been modified more than 100 times since World War II. Fears of a default have prompted Congress to raise the ceiling or suspend it every time our debt has met the ceiling. The last time was December of 2021.
Well, we have with us today someone who has taken a long trip to be here, but you're home today. This is U.S. Representative Jody Arrington. Let's talk a little bit about a new job that you just got. You've been a congressman, but you've got a new role this year.
I am so humbled that my colleagues had the confidence and trust in me to ask me to lead the charge on all things budget, debt and deficit, and getting our fiscal house in order, which I think is, if not the #1 issue, it is a top issue, because a financial crisis or a debt-related crisis would affect our economy, our national security, our standard of living, our way of life. So we are dangerously close to a debt crisis. And not just for Democrats, it's Republicans and Democrats alike. Washington needs fiscal accountability, and I am so excited about the opportunity to make that a reality for the first time in a long time. And I think most of my constituents in West Texas would give me a hearty amen to that.
Absolutely. And this job became a lot more serious.
Yes.
I mean, we're talking on Thursday, and just hours, within the hour, we hit the ceiling. So what does that say to you? How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm not even 10 days on the job, and now I'm in the middle of negotiating a debt limit statutory raise.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. We have, it's the budgets, it's the appropriations, it's the big omnibus spending packages that are driving our debt situation, and the fact that we're borrowing now almost $1.5 trillion every year to make up the shortfall of the lack of revenue coming into the Treasury. And this is about paying our creditors, right? Our parents and grandparents taught us pay your debts. But we can pay our debts, and we can protect the good faith and credit of the United States. I think that is important. But we should not proceed by just giving this president and Congress an unlimited line of credit or a new credit card, especially after $5 trillion in deficit spending over the last 2 years, which has created this firestorm of inflation, a recession. I mean, it would be foolish, it would be reckless not to negotiate some spending limitation and fiscal reforms before we move forward. The debt limit's been around for 100 years. Its purpose, in large part, is to make us all pause and recognize what our debt position is and the risks associated with it. It's never been this bad. We've never had this much debt in the history of the world.
Yeah.
No country has carried this much debt, and it's now larger than the entire United States economy. So we've got to do something, and I'm excited to be in the middle of it, and I hope we can do something unprecedented to start reining in spending bending the debt curve and restoring fiscal responsibility to the United States and to our government and to the Washington politicians.
And you mentioned negotiation. President Biden has been very clear that he did not plan to negotiate with Republicans, is specifically who he talked about. Well, the House is now controlled by Republicans.
That's right.
So what do you have to say to that? Because we're at a point now where something has to happen.
Yeah, well, the power of the purse is now squarely in the hands of Republicans in the House. Mm-hmm. That's where these measures begin, and the president obviously wants unlimited reign in terms of his spending capacity and his borrowing capacity. But he's proven to be a very poor steward with the recent $1 trillion bailout of student loans. But he's also bailed out Democrat states that were financially broke before even COVID. He bailed out union pensions to the tune of $100 billion. I could go down a long list of the recklessness, the fiscal irresponsibility of this administration. And there is no way on my watch, as the chairman of the Budget Committee and leader of all things fiscal accountability, that we're going to move forward without negotiating some fiscal reforms. So whether he likes it or not, this is about the health of our country. This is about the future of our country for our children. And I can't think of a bigger challenge for the 21st century, for my generation, than the national debt and a potential debt crisis as a result if we don't address it. So let's act like adults, and let's remember that there's a greater risk than just downgrading treasury bonds with the fear of a default. Now, we don't want that. We shouldn't default. We should pay our debts. But the greater risk is a massive debt-related crisis where we couldn't borrow and we would have to go and have massive, deep cuts and tax increases just to pay for the senior safety net, the military, and a lot of other important things that right now are being funded in large part by foreign creditors and domestic creditors. Things that we really needed to pay attention to and that I committed to delivering results on would be cutting back in the Farm Bill safety net. We did that in our first term. Making sure we got the B-21, which is the next generation bomber at Dyess Air Force Base. That base represents $1 million a day to that local economy, and we were able to secure the B-21. Most of that credit goes to the work that community did long before I showed up in Congress. The third piece to making sure that we have prosperity for future West Texans is that second only north-south federal highway. And that's the I-27 Ports to Plains. We got a federal designation, that's the first step. And then we got federal funding on the heels of that, which I think is unprecedented. I had help from my partner and colleague across the aisle in Henry Cuellar, and it's a game changer. It will represent tens of billions of dollars in economic growth and overall impact to this region. And this region's critical because we are the food, fuel, and fiber capital of the world. So we produce more ag and energy product than anybody in the world. But it's only valuable to the country if we can move that product, up through the backbone of the country in Middle America and out to the East and West Coast and around the world. So that highway is a big deal, and those three things that I mentioned are, it's a big deal to West Texas, and we've got to continue to stay on top of both the Farm Bill and continued investment in partnership with Texas, the state of Texas, to make sure we finish out the construction of that highway.
Well, Texas is swimming in cash it can't spend, $188.2 billion in available funds, but the budget proposals spend $50 billion less than that so far. State leaders say it's a good problem to have, but it's a problem nonetheless.